All right, guys, evening. It's a few minutes after 7, so most of us are here. So I think we can start. All right. Before we talk about or have any discussion on the video I posted just this afternoon, anybody have any questions regarding the topics for the groups? We touched on this last day. I sent you guys an email yesterday, so you're actually doing the topic in the order of your group itself. So any issues or questions? All right, so again, work together in your groups, produce a, hopefully a YouTube video. I prefer that over MP4. So if you do an MP4, which is what Zoom produces, you can convert that to YouTube. So that's preferable from my point of view for the purposes of presenting it to the class on August 25th. All right, so let's talk about, if we can, basically, our discussion on the video I posted this afternoon. All right, so anybody have any questions or comments on that particular video? Tyler?
Hi.
Hi, Tyler.
Yeah. So after watching the most recent video that was posted this afternoon, he had gone through a lot of examples of emails, and I'd actually went to the link that he provided at the end of the video and just looked at some of the examples there within the link he posted to the Federal Trade Commission.
Right.
So anyways, upon reviewing those, I noticed that I had gotten one of these emails about a month ago, so I figured I would take some action into actually forwarding this and reporting this email into the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center. And so I'm actually just looking at the page and looking into forwarding that email at this time. And I thought I would, just for some experience in what we've been talking about. And upon reviewing the page, I'm not sure if this is something that we'd mentioned. Something that I had noticed that was interesting is they had mentioned between March 6th and July 31st that there's been 2,770 Canadian reports of COVID-19 fraud.
Wow.
Amounting in $5.55 million lost to COVID-19 fraud.
Yeah, we actually have a video tonight during the class on COVID-19 frauds. So that's obviously very topical, but that's really, really interesting. Yeah, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, that's referenced in your text for this chapter. But thank you for doing that. That's really cool. Anything else you can tell us about what you see on that particular site?
There's mostly a lot of access to safety guides and just ways to report and protect yourself from scam and fraud. And there's also a link to the Canada's anti-spam legislation. And yeah, that's, for the most part, there's just a list of links here.
No, that's great. But I got to tell you, after I watched that video, it made me really nervous because, you know, the breadth of the basic scams that he was talking about. I mean, who doesn't see this stuff? Really? I mean, it's you know, it's just common. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen it. Hopefully, none of us have clicked on links that they talk about. I mean, but likelihood is that some of us probably have. I probably have. I know I had a virus on my phone last year that I in fact had to replace my phone as a function of it. But yeah, it was pretty scary. Tom, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I found it interesting that this is really common and it's really easy to fall for this trap, because recently I got an email for a job application that just seemed so good to be true. They're offering about 1,100, and me, I don't even have a resume that qualifies for that. So yeah, what they do is take your information and then they take your payment information and they just use it to bribe you or something. So that's what I found interesting.
No kidding. So yeah, well, thank you for that. Shivani?
Yeah, I think that more awareness should be created about these phishing links, because I'm also a victim of this, where persons will send me a link on my WhatsApp and say to fill it out, and you have to distribute it to the rest of your contacts in order to get money. And I also have friends who would regularly send me these links because they think that, oh, I'm gonna receive money if I send it to my WhatsApp contact.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments or experiences? At this point in the game, everybody is telling us about your experiences, which is great. I appreciate that. So that gives us a heads up on, what's actually happened to other people. Valerie?
Well, I was actually just thinking about, how they were doing the Netflix one. And one of the things that I did when I was hacked this past summer or this past winter, I don't know, it was like 7 months of changing my password. But one of the things that I did was I actually changed my email on that account, and they sent it to the old email that it was registered to, that they had hacked into. And that's where I knew that it wasn't it wasn't from them specifically. So that was one way that I actually stopped that, was by changing my email address.
Good. Yeah, obviously that's their point of contact. So good for you. Michelle?
Yeah, my question was about the, I don't know who was asking the question about the job application thing, but how do we know when we're applying for a position if it's the real thing? Like, how would we know? As he was saying, the guy before me, if there's a job application that comes in, how do we know if it's real?
Your best proposition in that case is actually to call the company. I mean, go online, find an actual head office. Or any office for that matter that they have, whether it's a branch office or head office, call them, right? And ask them, is this something you do with respect to jobs? Is this how you approach people with respect to jobs? Are these the kind of offers you make online?
I don't even trust that anymore. Like, you hear so many horror stories and things like that. So, even if they have an office downtown and you go there physically and see that I don't know if I trust that either anymore.
Well, I don't blame you, but I mean, it's, the only answer is, and it's what we talk about throughout the entire course is, obviously educate yourself about who you're dealing with. That's all you can really do. And then take additional steps to verify the veracity of where something is coming from.
Isn't there still the Better Business Bureau? Still,
Sure.
we have, we can go there and see if a business is registered and if it's legal, right?
Yeah, although, it's better, and it's been around for a long time, the BBB, but it's purely voluntary.
Oh.
So you if you want to belong to the Better Business Bureau, you pay for it, right? And so that gives you a membership in it. And what they do, right, and what they profess to do is to basically tell you, if you make an inquiry about a company, whether they've ever had any complaints. So you could be a phony company, right? They don't check to see if your articles of incorporation are properly filled out and registered with the Ontario government or the federal government. They don't talk to you to see who's the president, who's the CEO or the treasurer of this bigger company. All they do is take the name, they take the money for the registration with the business, and then over a course of time, and there's been no complaints about them. And if it's a phony business, there probably isn't, as in they create the business for the purposes of doing something down the road. So, if I create a phony company today and I don't plan to use it for 6 years or a month or 6 months or a year from now, and then a year from now I decide to use it for whatever scam is out there, and
a shell company.
Yeah, could be. And somebody like you basically says, well, I'm going to check you out with the BBB, and you give them a call, and what they're going to come back and say is, oh yeah, this company's been with us for a year, there's been 0 complaints, right? So that's that's probably not a great resource. But there's there are other ways to do it. You can check with the Ontario government and the federal government if a company has been incorporated properly with a registered head office. So that way you can find out, as in if you go on a website and the company is offering you a job and the company says, well, our office is at 1000 Queen Street, West Sault Ste. Marie, right? Yeah. And you can check that out. You don't have to believe them. You can find out, you can go through records and find out, is this company actually at that head office? Is that a real address? That, and so, because that's easy to manufacture. You can put a phony company online. You can create an address as a head office. It could be on a real street in a real city, and it could be a real number, but it may not necessarily have anything to do with them. So yeah, the education, right? That's the only thing that you can really do, and verification to make sure that who you're dealing with is actually real. And when you watch this kind of stuff, like the video I gave you guys, it's like, man, like what isn't going to be a risk, in these kind of things online. Thanks, Shell.
Thank you.
Maxine?
Yeah, definitely. I don't remember what I was watching, but they were saying that
You can speak up a little bit, Lexine. It's hard to hear you. Sorry.
I don't remember what I was watching, but they were saying something of the sort, like whenever you're registering for like important stuff online and you're not quite sure if it's real or not or whatever, it's best to have like the specific email that you use to register for suspicious stuff online.
Right. Yep, absolutely. That was a point that was made. Thank you. Anybody else with questions? Oh, Tyler, your hand's up again.
Yes, just quickly. He had mentioned a good step to take is to call like the actual company. Say if you receive a fraud email from what seems to be Netflix, to call the actual Netflix company itself. So, and I think this is a good step to take. When I had received a fraud email from Scotiabank, and I've never been with Scotiabank, so I called the bank itself, and they directed me specifically and immediately to a phishing line or anti-phishing line that they have directly within their organization, and had me forward the email to that.
Excellent. Yeah, we're going to talk about that again tonight as well, about corporations, mid-sized, large corporations that have their own in-house or hire consultants to handle this kind of stuff for them. So it avoids actually having to go to the police. So again, thank you for that. Shivani, your hand's up again.
Yes. So in a case like WhatsApp, where these scammers ask you to like fill out the things on the website and send it to your contacts, like what kind of benefit would they get from it? Like how would they use like your WhatsApp details and like could you give me more explanation on that?
Well, I don't use that website or that app, right? So I don't know. Anybody else in the class have more familiarity with that particular app and the kind of information that they look for? Because I honestly don't use it. I don't know particularly about that particular use. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think they're trying to get your payment information, something like that, and they're trying to get your contacts, your friends, families, and all that. They're trying to link them up together, and just trying to. That's what I think.
But on WhatsApp, you don't have to put in your payment info, like your card information.
Oh.
Okay, so I mean that's maybe you can check it out and tell us. Maybe don't come back and tell us next class, because clearly phishing, which we're going to talk about tonight in more detail, and whatever and obviously online scams. The purpose of it is the prime purpose of it is to collect personal information, identification information, to build a profile to in fact then use that to attack and target people to get money for the most part, that kind of thing. So yeah, that particular app, I'm sorry I don't have any familiarity with, but maybe you can find it for us. Okay, anybody else? Any other hands up?
Me.
Okay, okay, go for it.
I was actually going to comment on, I don't know who it was, Lexine, I think, talking about the WhatsApp. What they do is I was actually reading that earlier, they'll take your profile information, they'll pretend to be you and try to get financial support from your friends or whatever, and like lead into other profiles based on the information that you've provided them. Well, it's not every time, but that's part of what they'll do with it.
Well, there you go. That makes sense. And that's obviously targeting. So yeah. Okay. Michelle, your hand's still up or no? We'll take that as a no then. Anybody else? Any other comments or questions? Okay, good stuff. All right, so let's thank you for all that, guys. So let's move to the lecture then for tonight. So tonight we're dealing more specifically with phishing. We've talked about phishing previously in the class, and so what we're doing tonight is talking about more specific targeting that actually takes place. Okay, so it's chapter 8 in your text, so hopefully you've read it. Clearly, and what phishing does, and you're going to see some videos on it. Its purpose is, and it's done broadly around the world, is to steal and access personal information, which we've talked about a lot. There really has been no progress internationally in stopping this kind of thing, right? At least by traditional means, which is basically investigation by law enforcement, and that is not worked as a remedy for this kind of thing. And clearly, there's as even when things are, certain kinds of phishing takes place, and it is in fact, there is some remedy put in place to stop it, then something new will come up, right? The cyber criminals, just like any criminals, really adapt. Right? They adapt to circumstances. So when one door closes, another door opens, and that's exactly what happens. So, there's always going to be new threats with new kinds of spear phishing and ransomware. We're going to talk about that. The dark web plays a role. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. The dark web, if you can figure out how to get there, and we did touch on that, you can get there, and you can actually hire people to do this kind of thing for you, the phishing, or hire or somehow upload tools that will allow you to do it, depending on what your target market is going to be. Okay, so the dark web plays a really important role for that, and something where you can do and get access to things that you want to use to basically install malware, get information for financial gain. All those kind of things can be done without, to a great degree, the purview of the police, right? If it's on the dark web. Right. So, clearly, again, as we said earlier, the only way to make progress in these kind of things is education, public education in that. And it's why these videos are made by these guys that know what they're doing, telling us, here's what happens. Here's how I addressed it. Right. We've seen a lot of videos that do that. Right. So the thing about phishing is that there's been, you have new kinds of phishing. Texting is called smishing. So who knew, but that's what it's called. And you also have what's called voice solicitation, which is called vishing. And we're going to watch a video about that.
So curiosity makes people open mail attachments, which installs malware on their PC. But you also said that you take advantage of the helpfulness of people. How's that?
Well, I also use a method called phishing. I simply call the target person and pretend that I'm a guy from the IT department. It often worked for me to tell them that their PC has a virus. I will advise the user to operate some useless system diagnostics to distract him, and at some point, when trust is built, I just ask for the password. When this doesn't work, I start scaring them. For example, by telling them that it is very, very urgent to find the virus, and that he or she will be held accountable if that virus spreads on the network. Just ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing is that the target person gets suspicious and hangs up. But trust me, not many do. By the way, it is more difficult to do a phishing attack by directly attacking high-profile targets like CEOs, because they are often better trained and become suspicious more easily. As a starting point for our attack, taking over a normal user account has proved to be most successful.
For hackers, it is much easier to take advantage of real people, just like you, rather than trying to get around a firewall. All it takes is a phone. An outside number won't make a target suspicious because many companies use external service providers to manage their IT. So an outside number is not seen as a warning sign. Even an internal number can be faked. Maybe the phone system was hacked first, only to prepare for the main attack. In fact, publicly available software to fake numbers exists. So that's a small hurdle and not an indicator at all. What can you do? A bank will never ask you for your credit card PIN number, and an IT department will never ask you for your password. If they do, they are either badly trained or they're hackers. In both cases, you should refuse to provide your password. Instead, you should simply hang up and report the incident to your manager, IT department, or security manager, depending on your company's structure. If you think you might have revealed sensitive information about your organization, do not hesitate to report it to the responsible person in your company, including the network administrator. He or she can handle any suspicious or unusual activities. Second, you should immediately change any passwords you might have revealed. If you did use the same password for multiple applications, make sure to change it for each account, and do not use that compromised password ever again. If you work in a larger company, chances are high that there is a policy in place for cases like this. Be aware that these calls might also reach you on your private phone. There are further scenarios that hackers use, like pretending to work for an insurance company or as a government investigator. But they all have the same goal, creating a scenario where you're asked to give your password, bank account, PIN, or other sensitive information. Under all circumstances, never provide your password or other sensitive information to anyone else, not in a call, not on a website, or anywhere.
All right, guys. And just following up on that, so clearly one of the things that is really used and very common in phishing is the use of attachments. Right? So attachments, they come with an email, and you're almost always directed to them to click on them to see what they say. And curiosity is a really big motivator for this kind of thing. Usually you'll see it as an attachment. It's going to be a PDF file potentially. It could be a Word doc, but it's usually PDF. And once you click on that, then you've done what they've wanted you to do. They've gained access to whatever account they're talking to you about that. We've also seen a lot of enhancement of what are called botnets. So I'm going to just give you a small video or a short video on this.
Malicious software, or malware, can harm your computer in a variety of ways, and sometimes the effects are not known until it's too late. What's worse, your computer can become one of many infected with malware, creating a botnet, short for robot and network. Cyber criminals use special malware, usually a Trojan horse, to breach the security of several users' computers. These take control of each computer and organize all of the infected machines into a network of bots, which are unwitting tools that the cyber criminal can remotely manage. The infected system may act completely normal with no warning signs. A bot can be a PC, Mac, or even a smartphone. Oftentimes, the cyber criminal will seek to infect and control thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions of computers, so that they can act as the master of a large zombie network or bot network. These botnets are capable of delivering many different types of cyber crimes, such as DDoS attacks, spreading malware, online fraud, and wide-scale spam or phishing campaigns. In some cases, cyber criminals will establish a large network of zombie machines and then sell access to the zombie network to other criminals, either on a rental basis or as an outright sale. Spammers may rent or buy a network in order to operate a large-scale spam campaign. The consequences of being part of a botnet can be very serious. Some risks include high internet bills, slow and unstable computer performance, potential legal implications if your computer is compromised, and stolen personal data, which can be used in blackmail or identity theft. Becoming a victim of a botnet attack is all too easy. A common source of infection is downloading files from an unknown site or from file sharing. Even social media sites and apps can contain malware that can turn your computer into a bot. High-risk computers are ones with outdated internet security software, or even none at all. You can limit the risks by always verifying the site or app that you plan on downloading from, and ensuring it is from a legitimate source. However, the best form of protection is installing effective anti-malware software against Trojans and other threats. Always ensure that your computer is equipped with the latest internet security software in order to prevent becoming part of a botnet.
All right. Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about phishing and some businesses that are common targets. And we talked about this last day with the detective sergeant as well. So bank customers, basically there's been a survey done that basically say that bank customers are more concerned about scams, which is everything with the phishing and the letter scams, the vishing, all the other kinds of the scams we have. People with money, basically, are more concerned about those kind of things than they are with the prospect of their home being burglared, right, or a vehicle theft, right? And that says a lot because those are high-level, fearsome kind of things. Victims are often prompted to take action via a fake request or a demand by a trusted organization, PayPal, and this is, and again, the detective sergeant mentioned this, and I've seen a ton of this, even personally and with friends of mine, with calls from the Canada Revenue Agency, right? So, and I've had, I can't tell you how many of these calls I've had. So it's it's a phone scam where somebody from the Canada Revenue Agency, it's actually a recording indicates that you have done something criminal, obviously with respect to your taxes for the most part, and that you will be subject to criminal charges by the CRA. And then if you follow up on it, they actually, and I don't do this, but I actually had a friend of mine who called me about this because he's in business for himself, right? That's always a high target for the CRA legitimately. If you're in business for yourself, you tend to have a lot of deductions to reduce obviously your taxable income. And often things like, every time you play a game of golf or you go for dinner, all kinds of those kind of things, people who work for themselves kind of write off an awful lot of that, even though it's not necessarily all business expensed, right? So taking your family out for dinner and writing that off as a business expense is improper, but it's done all the time, right? And 99 out of 100 times, you're never going to get called up on it. But there's always the risk that you will, right? So those people who are in business for themselves, when they get a call from the Canada Revenue Agency saying you've done something criminal, we're going to proceed with charges, here's a number to call. And so this friend of mine who again had his own business was nervous enough about this that he in fact did call the number. And then somebody actually picked up and basically told him what he had to do basically to put this problem aside, which was to pay $3,000 in tax arrears. That was the amount it was said. And fortunately, a friend of mine, he basically hung up the phone and then called me and said, what am I going to do? And I said, well, two things. That's very, very, very likely a scam, so don't worry about it. Under no circumstances should you send them any money whatsoever. And if you are really concerned about it, call the cops. Right? And that's in fact what he did, and they just told him exactly the same thing that I just told him. But that happens all the time, and because the Canada Revenue Agency, is a venerable, widely known, everybody participates and has contact with the CRA because you file taxes every year, probably, and so it's one of those things that you when you hear from them, you pay attention. Because it's not somebody, from something you never heard about before. It's something that you actually recognize. So, that's a really, really common scam, and it's a scam that uses the emotion. Like in last class, we talked about emotions. It uses fear as the emotion, right? Because the fear of being charged with a crime, is a pretty strong fear, and something that that usually demands some kind of action. All right. Banks themselves, they often have an internal fraud team that will basically take care of anybody who's a bank customer who thinks they've been hacked improperly. So they'll look into the issue. They will put an alert on the account. That's a very simple thing to do. And then they will determine whether funds are going to be reimbursed. Right. And, some credit cards now come with this kind of protection on them, and they're almost always issued by banks. So this is a bank kind of fraud. So a lot of cards come with fraud protection. So in fact, if you are scammed and your account is somehow hacked and money is taken out of it or off your credit card, you will get reimbursed. There are still some cards out there, lesser, no fee cards, those kind of things, or secured cards that don't have protection for you. So that's a whole different ballgame, and something that obviously you're going to want to negotiate with the bank that issues the card. Most businesses basically hire cybersecurity consultants or contractors. They do that more often than rely upon outside external resources like the police. So the stat given in your text is that about 42% of reported incidents of these kinds of banking, money hacks kind of thing, they report it to a cybersecurity consultant or a contractor that they specifically hire for their own purposes, and only 10% of reported incidents are made to the police. And obviously, that lower number of reports to the police open up resources for the police to work on those cases they in fact have. I think it was Michelle in last class who asked the detective sergeant about something that she was worried about, and should she call the police? And his answer was interesting. His answer was pretty much don't bother us to a great degree because we're not going to do anything unless we have enough, we spend the time and the money and the manpower to do an investigation, to basically access whatever they have to access, computers, hard drives, whatever, internet, whatever, the web, whatever they have to do. His answer basically was, unless it's, I kind of got the answer was, unless it's something really serious, where you've probably lost a chunk of money, that kind of thing, then, from the police's point of view, they don't expect to hear from you. So that's an interesting kind of approach that was given by Detective Sergeant Rice last class. Here's a graph. This was basically provided to you in your textbook as well. And this tells you basically the external parties, the percentage of the population or incidents that refer to external parties when they have an IT issue, obviously. So at the top of it, again, is IT consultants or contractors. I believe that's, again, that stat was 42%. And then you go down, about 40% don't report it at all. Okay, so they just keep it in-house and don't do a thing about it. So banks are about 13, 14%. Again, the police service is 10%. And then the bottom, the bottom ones, the bottom 6 items, they're pretty much all government sources, right? So what that basically says is that for the most part, people do not, rely upon government sources for the purposes of reporting incidents. So the fact that Tyler was saying earlier in the class that he looked at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center for some information, that was a really good thing to do. All right, now it's mentioned in the text, so but good for you for doing that. But not very, very many people do that kind of research. They don't rely upon it. Okay. The response of law enforcement to phishing, right? So the text says, and this is somewhat different than what the detective sergeant told us, that phishing victims should contact the police just as they would after a break and enter, right? But again, they're not going to do anything unless there's actually been a loss for the most part, right? Again, the totality of the incident is assessed by the police, which is what the detective sergeant told us. They'll determine what was compromised and basically what caused the target being attacked. And obviously they will provide, if in fact they're going to do an investigation, they will get all the important details from the police. Linguistics evidence, that's mentioned in your text as well. So linguistics meaning basically a manner of speaking. Right, so that's what they look for. Is there a certain manner of speaking, in the attack that will lead them back to who did it? So there used to be, and they don't do it anymore. And I mentioned this earlier. There used to be what were called Nigerian 416 or 419 scams, and they were the widest known, most pervasive kinds of scams at the beginning of the web. To a great degree, at least the beginning of the worldwide use of the web in the 80s and 90s. And what it was, interesting enough, and I don't know if you've ever seen this before, there's still some of them out there, but I don't know if they're Nigerian anymore, but they're basically this. You would get an email saying, "Dear sir, my name is Obalu Omala, or whatever it's going to be. I am a Nigerian prince. I have been, or my father was on the throne and was dethroned and exiled. I have access to $21 million in gold reserves that I need an external, basically clean individual to access for me. If you will participate with me in doing this, I will split it evenly with you. So we're talking, I will give you $10.5 million worth of gold if you participate in this with me. And you know, because it was very new, this is now 20 odd years ago, and people weren't educated about scams and these kind of things taking place, it was very successful. Right? People, you know, thousands, if not millions of people actually participated in these scams. They'd never seen them, didn't realize they existed in real terms. They thought that they were, you know, it was like winning the lottery. Wow, how lucky am I that I was contacted by this prince, right? It's not always a prince. It's, you know, so it could be a general who was deposed during a military coup, that kind of thing, right? So they're pretty sophisticated, but this takes us back to linguistics. They weren't very careful about, you know, about language. And they didn't need to be, you know, they made it clear that they came from another country. So English wasn't their first language. And so it wouldn't be that difficult for somebody like a trained professional, a police officer, to look at something like that and obviously recognize that it didn't come from somebody who speaks English, widely. So anyway, and the Detective Sergeant said that they don't exist anymore. So I hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard of any Nigerian scams for quite a while. I don't know how they were shut down, but if they were shut down, they would have actually had to have been shut down in Nigeria, right? And so, you know, whereas today, a great number of scams are, for instance, in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, for instance. And then as the sergeant was saying, you know, he went to Ukraine, and there was a building, a 6-story office building that was just full of people on terminals, you know, carrying out scams, you know, 24/7, basically. All right. So spear phishing is a powerful variation of phishing. So it is a personalized attack to lure very specific people. So it's spear phishing, like, you know, actually spear phishing. So research is conducted by the person who is going to do it on the target. Right? And we talked a bit about that the other day when we talked about social engineering. Right? And so often the cyber criminal will in fact do research on social media where it's easily accessible to find out, you know, all the kinds of things that you share. If you still use Facebook, I know that a lot of you don't use Facebook anymore, but some of you still may do it. But there's obviously other social media websites that have your personal information on it. So it's easy to get that. And then what happens is that phone calls are made to people who are very specifically targeted, and they impersonate people that you know, or they basically indicate they are from organizations that they have connections to, right? So spear phishing is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody is particularly centered out to be targeted based upon their particularities of who they are and what is online in order to access their personal information for that purpose. Okay, so let's watch this.
We have seen different threat actors exploiting the coronavirus crisis to send spear phishing campaigns.
Hey, Jaime, I heard you have some interesting story about some of the phishing campaigns using the recent coronavirus theme. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's correct. So as usual, the bad guys are trying to take advantage of, you know, any opportunity they have to trick more victims into, you know, clicking on malicious links and opening malicious documents. So in this occasion, we're going to talk about how cyber criminals are exploiting the coronavirus crisis, and I'm pretty sure that at this point everybody is familiar with coronavirus, so we are not going to explain what it is. But, we are going to describe how, some of these campaigns that we have found, both we have found cases where, cyber criminals, financially motivated cyber criminals are trying to exploit this, but also we have found a few campaigns that belong to, some of the threat actors that we track in the cyber espionage group. So that will be, actors that are likely a state sponsor and are using these campaigns to gain, access to, local governments and other type of victims. So in most cases, these emails are coming from, are looking like they come from government organizations such as, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or maybe the World Health Organization, or even, things like, hey, these are the latest news about the coronavirus, click here because, there is something new that you need to know about. So, trying to exploit the sense of urgency that these type of incidents actually, provoke in people. So the first, we have been monitoring the threat landscape since January, kind of like actively looking for these campaigns because we know every time there is something like this, we are going to see this activity because, cyber criminals, as we said before, they always try to exploit this type of, incidents. So the first one that we saw was actually a campaign in late January that was targeting users in Japan, and this was the Emotet malware. Many of you are familiar with it. Emotet is one of the most common malware families today. They're launching spear phishing campaigns almost every day, and usually the Emotet is the first stage. And that, Emotet will download other payloads that, sometimes it's TrickBot, sometimes it's other payload, depending on who is running those campaigns. The second campaign that we saw that followed that one was a group that we call, the cyber community calls Patchwork. And, this is a believed state-sponsored actor and in this particular case was targeting Chinese users and corporations, and this was in early February. Another interesting case that we found is, there was a spear phishing email that we found in a public malware repository that was likely, it was looking like it was coming from the Center for Public Health of the Ministry of the Health of Ukraine, and was delivering a bait document containing, again, like latest news about the coronavirus, and it was targeting some local government in the Ukraine. We couldn't find out which, threat actor was behind this. It didn't kind of like match any of our, our clusters of threat activity that we have. So we kind of created a new, separate cluster of activity for this actor that we will continue to monitor. On top of this, we have been seeing many different, remote access tool threats. So basically, Microsoft Office documents that either exploiting a specific CVE or using macros to deliver, different RATs like Remcos, Nanocore, and Parallax. So we have seen multiple campaigns. Those are usually individuals or, cyber criminals that are, launching one-off campaigns. So since they use these malware families that are shared in the in cybercrime forums, and it's very easy to access those malware families, it's really hard to tell in those cases who is behind. But the more recently and the more recent one that we have been analyzing and keeping paying attention is one campaign that we found that we suspect is related to a threat actor that Proofcoin calls TA428. And this particular threat actor has been targeting, government and IT organizations in East Asia for, the last couple of years. So we saw a campaign that was using this coronavirus lure as well to trick users. And then the last one that we found a couple of days ago was the OSTAP malware family. So there was a campaign again that was targeting users in Italy. Remember that Italy is one of the countries with more coronavirus cases, so it's very likely that the threat actors are exploiting that information and try to target users in some of those countries that have the more coronavirus cases. And lately, the way we have tracked this is both, with the intelligence that we have internally from AT&T Cybersecurity and AT&T Alien Labs and AT&T CSO, but also, we have seen multiple publications from Cisco, from, and other vendors that have been talking about some of these campaigns as well. And don't forget that, if you want to access the indicators of compromise and the threat intelligence related to these campaigns and others, you can find all this information in the Open Threat Exchange. So it's otx.alienball.com, and that's where you can access all those indicators that we will continue pushing more indicators as we find more campaigns and updating, the indicators that are already there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You guys have been really busy. Something like this, usually it's a little more isolated of an incident that cyber criminals tend to attack. Maybe this particular city has some issue going on, or maybe this particular country. But in this case, in the case of coronavirus, it's a global issue, right? It's something that almost everybody is facing. So the threat landscape, so to speak, the number of people who are coercible, if you want to use the word, to an email that says something about coronavirus is huge. There's so many different countries that you can get after and so many different ways to do it. So yeah, you guys have been really busy, and I'm sure there's a lot of really good information on that Open Threat Exchange.
Also, what would be some recommendations for average users to protect against something like this, other than regular internet hygiene? Any ideas, any suggestions?
Yeah, for users, follow your training and follow, common sense, right? If you get an email from, that has a call to action, always double check, things like who is sending the email, the subject, the headers, does it have any links, does it have any attachments? And if you have any doubts about the origin or whether or not you should click, report this to your, security teams, or just ignore the email. If it's something urgent, it's very likely that it will come through, another source as well.
Interesting. Good point.
Familiarize yourself with social engineering tactics.
Yeah.
And one of the main tenets of it is urgency and playing upon fear.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. That's a good call out, Jaime, is if the email in front of you has something urgent, to get in front of your face, that should be a little red flag.
I think the theme is user education and trying to pause and think about it. Do I need to use this specific opening, or maybe give access to the macros or not? I think that's the key point here.
Yeah, and the other key point, obviously, and we talked about this last week, is again, social engineering, and which targets emotions, and again, fear, greed, love, all those kind of things we talked about before. But when it comes to the coronavirus, it's fear, right? We just, for most of us, probably more my generation than yours, but there's a real fear because we're more compromised than younger people are. Although, obviously the recent data is that lots of young people are being infected. But, the end result, being sick, it may be more dramatic for those of us who are older. But it is fear. This is an unknown. We haven't had something like this since the Spanish flu in 102 years ago. So it's really something. So I have no doubt that there'd be a ton of basically cybercrime directed at people who are fearful of what may happen to them as a function of this virus, right? Just makes sense. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about tonight, guys, is ransomware, and we touched on this earlier in very general terms, but ransomware is really interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, now it does deal with people's emotions. Again, fear of not being able to access your computer any longer, your data, but it does basically target the hardware more than anything, right? So what it does is, if it gets into a system, it's malicious software that basically is designed to encrypt files and makes data inaccessible, right? And what it does is when it gets in there, and this is almost always directed at large corporations, often nonprofit institutions like universities. That's happened quite a bit. hospitals, where record keeping is so critical, right? You cannot go without having a record available almost immediately, 24/7 in a hospital, because you're dealing with people's lives. This kind of thing where, if the organization is unfortunately, open for this kind of attack, then, if the malware is installed, then, it's going to be pretty clear that either you pay up to basically be unencrypted, right, and have that data available to you, or basically you can count on losing it. And that's essentially what happens. Is, in fact, if you don't pay it, you will lose it, to some degree, right? And so if you are the subject of this kind of attack, where your data is frozen and not accessible to you, right, then if the decision is not to pay, then the organization that's been targeted, they're responsible for whatever happens for that lack of data going forward. Police and cybercrime experts, consultants who are often retained by companies who look at these kind of things, take a different view on how to deal with it. The police tend to recommend not paying somebody for it. Cyber consultants virtually always recommend to, in fact, pay, right? Because and that's what makes this very unique, is that this is kind of an enabling kind of cybercrime. This is a cybercrime that actually does pay, and it pays well. And you have people who are hired, like cybercrime consultants, to stop this kind of thing, right? Well, if they can put, basically firewalls and things in place at the beginning of a system so it doesn't happen, then they're doing their job. But if they're hired once the ransomware is installed, right, and that happens more often than not, right, then, their position isn't to basically get the client out of the hands of the people who've installed the ransomware, other than by way of a payment, right? And payments don't tend to be, they won't be outlandish, in that the cyber criminals, they assess the organization that they're targeting, and they know what their cash flow is to a great degree. They know, how much money will break them, right, and how much money won't, right? There's no point in, I'm just telling you how to do this, there's no point in installing malware on a company and then asking for more money than they can, feasibly make available to pay you off, because, if the request is for a sum of money that will break a company or bankrupt them, then what's the point of paying it, right? They're going to go out of business anyway. So, they do their homework. They do, assess how much is a reasonable amount to pay in a reasonable period of time, right? Because the longer that somebody is without the data, the more they can, they could probably try to adapt to rebuild that database, outside of the sphere of the ransomware. So, the whole point is to get in there, get it installed, make the ransom request, get paid quickly, then basically unencrypt the damage and disappear, right? And that's also a really important point as well, is that, it's like some, in some ransoms of real people, where in fact, people are taken hostage, ransoms are paid, and often they're killed anyway. At least that's what you see on TVs and movies. But in this case, it's important for the integrity of the ransomware to actually unencrypt the data, right? Because people have to be able to rely upon the fact that they know from other experiences, and and these things are always reported in the press, from other experiences, that in fact paying the people off will in fact gain them access back to their data, and that's what makes these attacks so viable. They really are. So 75% of victims pay, right? That's a fairly high percentage. So this is a very fruitful, enterprising way to make a living if you're a cyber criminal. So take notes, right? Anybody who does it, let me know. Anyway, it does embolden cyber criminals to continue ransomware attacks because they are so successful. And there is no, apart from basically putting systems in place to protect the malware from never gaining access to your data, apart from that, you're always going to be exposed to this, in a business organization. All right, so let's watch this video, and then we're almost done.
Ordinarily, falling victim to a ransom plot means that you are the son or daughter of some rich person, and the only way to get out of it is by paying tons of money or waiting for Arnold Schwarzenegger or Kurt Russell to come and rescue. At least that's what TV would have us believe. These days, being held for ransom can actually happen quite differently with your computer, of all things. I'm talking, of course, about ransomware, a particularly diabolical type of malware, that is to say bad software, that's been making headlines recently. So here's how it works. Once ransomware gets on your computer, usually through an infected email attachment or the all-too-common Trojan horse attack, it will lock your computer or your data in some way and demand payment in exchange for giving control of your system back to you. Some of the simpler forms of ransomware will simply try to fool you into thinking there's something wrong with your computer and get you to pay money to fix it. A common tactic that we see in those banner ads that tell you that you've been inexplicably infected by something. Now, oftentimes with those, you've probably got at least rudimentary control over your system still, so the only real issue is that you have to deal with these constant pop-ups until you find a way to get rid of the malware. A much more irritating kind of ransomware will lock your computer entirely and keep you from logging into your operating system unless you cough up the money. Many of these varieties of ransomware will display a threatening message purporting to be from the FBI or some other super hardcore police agency saying that your computer was used for something highly illegal, but you can get your computer back and avoid doing hard time just by paying a few $100s. Sounds absurd, right? But people have fallen victim to this, and even if you recognize the scam immediately, those ones can be a real pain to remove. Worst of all is the ransomware that not only locks your system, but also encrypts your files and won't provide you with the keys to decrypt them unless you pay up. The most notable of these being CryptoLocker, although many other variants have popped up since that one first made the news back in 2013. Some other issues with these, unsurprisingly, cybercriminals aren't exactly the most trustworthy folks, and many people have reported not getting their files back even after paying the ransom. And on top of that, there are some kinds of ransomware that don't even ask permission. They just hit your Bitcoin wallet and take the money without even giving you a chance to say, well, hold on, let me think about whether this data is actually worth paying for. So then, how can you rescue your computer and protect your cash if you get infected? Many of the non-encrypting types of ransomware can be removed by booting into safe mode and running an up-to-date anti-malware tool, or if that fails, downloading a bootable removal tool to a flash drive and running that. However, if you've been hit by an encrypting variety of ransomware, you're not going to want to hear this, but you're probably out of luck, as most of these use very strong encryption algorithms. In fact, the FBI, yes, the real one, has advised people to just pay these ransoms in the past. So if you don't like the idea of your money going to online criminals, back up your data somewhere, preferably offline, and remember, please, to explain to your grandparents what a banner ad is if they call you in a panic over having 50 viruses on their all-in-one PC. Speaking of getting educated, with a lynda.com membership, you can get educated.
All right, guys. And lastly, the role of prevention when dealing with phishing and spear phishing and ransomware. So what police do is they make it public when these kind of attacks take place. They circulate in the community. Obviously, again, that's education. That's something where basically people are put on notice that watch out for an email from this source, or as I said earlier, from the Canada Revenue Agency, or from whatever happens to be circulated in the community. Right, again, education and awareness are critical to prevention, right? And the Stop, Think, Connect, we've seen that throughout the textbook. That is basically protecting a resource protection against malicious attacks. So stop, think, and connect. All right, guys, that's it for the lecture. So it's pretty short tonight. So there you go. We have just under 20 students in the class tonight. So I'm going to put you into only 4 breakout rooms tonight. All right, so only worry about questions 1 to 4 that I posted on Moodle. Does anybody have any questions before I do this? Are we good? All right, guys, 15 minutes again, because again, they're fairly simple questions. So I'll send you a note in 10 minutes saying you have 5 more to go, and I'll see you when you're done. All right, guys.